I flew 18 hours from Johannesburg, South Africa to Atlanta, Georgia, just to attend my younger sister's wedding. The jet lag was actively vibrating through my bones, but nothing could dampen my spirit as my black SUV pulled up to the sweeping oak-lined driveway of the Magnolia Estate. I had spent weeks picking out the perfect emerald green silk dress that complemented my skin and getting my natural hair braided into intricate waist-length goddess locks. I was 34 years old, standing at the pinnacle of my life, ready to celebrate Tiana the beautiful bride. But the moment my heels touched the polished marble steps of the grand entrance, my parents, Brenda and Vernon, stepped out from behind the heavy mahogany doors, physically blocking my path. They did not look like parents welcoming their eldest daughter home. They looked like bouncers at an exclusive club, their faces twisted into identical masks of hostility and panic. "Only family is allowed inside," my mother hissed, her eyes darting nervously toward the courtyard where the wealthy, conservative white family of my new brother-in-law Bradley was sipping champagne. "You were not invited, Nia. Leave." Heartbroken, I looked at them. But 3 days later, my mother would call me begging for $38,000 and I would laugh. If you have ever been the scapegoat in your own family, hit that like button, subscribe, and let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. What I did next destroyed their perfect illusion forever. "Excuse me," I asked, keeping my voice low but steady, refusing to give them the dramatic reaction they were bracing for. The humid Atlanta air suddenly felt suffocating. "I am your daughter. Tiana is my sister. What do you mean I was not invited?" Vernon, wearing a tuxedo that looked far too stiff for his usual posture, crossed his arms over his chest, puffing himself up to block the entrance completely. "Do not play dumb, Nia. You know exactly why you are not welcome here today. This is the most important day of Tiana's life. She is marrying into the Caldwell family. They are old money. They have standards, expectations, and a very specific image. We cannot have you ruining this." "Ruining it by existing?" I asked, my eyebrows raising in disbelief. Brenda took a step closer, her voice dropping to a venomous whisper. She reached out and actually flicked the end of one of my goddess locks with absolute disgust. "Look at you, with this hair, with your loud opinions and your complete disregard for proper society. Bradley's parents are traditional, they are conservative. They do not need to see Tiana's college dropout sister showing up looking like she just walked out of a village. You have always tried to embarrass us, Nia, always." The irony of her statement tasted like ash in my mouth. A college dropout. That was the title they had slapped on my forehead 12 years ago when I left a mundane business administration program to chase my vision. I had poured my heart and soul into building startups while sleeping on an air mattress in their damp basement. That was a basement they charged me $800 a month to live in. Every single cent of my rent money went straight to paying for Tiana's pageant dresses, her luxury car leases, and eventually the country club membership they bought to impress Bradley, her mediocre, supposedly wealthy white fiancé. Tiana was the golden child, the perfect, compliant daughter who knew how to smile, nod, and play the game. I was the scapegoat, the rebellious disappointment who refused to shrink herself to fit their narrow, outdated narrative of success. "I look like a successful, independent black woman," I corrected her, keeping my chin high, refusing to let the sting in my eyes turn into tears. "I flew 18 hours to celebrate my sister. I brought a gift. I came with love. And you are standing here choosing the comfort of strangers over your own flesh and blood. They are not strangers, they are our future." Vernon spat back, his face flushing with anger. "Bradley is giving your sister a life you could never even dream of. He is elevating this entire family. You chose to be a failure the minute you walked away from a real education to play around with those silly little internet companies. You lost the right to stand beside us when you turned your back on our traditions. Now turn around, get back in whatever rented car you came in, and leave before the Caldwells see you." I looked past them, catching a glimpse of Tiana through the glass panels of the foyer. She was wearing a custom lace gown, laughing perfectly, as Bradley handed her a glass of champagne. She looked up, made direct eye contact with me, and then quickly turned her back, pretending she had not seen a thing. That was the ultimate betrayal. The silent complicity of the sister I had spent my entire youth trying to protect. She was willing to erase me from her life, just to maintain the illusion of a picture-perfect heritage for a man she barely knew. A cold, profound clarity washed over me. The agonizing desperation I had carried for over 3 decades, the constant exhausting need to earn my parents' love, to prove that my path was valid, to show them I was worthy of a seat at their table, simply evaporated into the heavy Georgia air. They did not want me at their table. They never had. "You are right, Mom," I said smoothly, a genuine chilling smile spreading across my lips. "I do not fit your high society image at all, and I would absolutely hate to ruin Tiana's magical day." Vernon looked slightly taken aback by my sudden agreement, his defensive posture faltering for a split second. "So you will leave quietly?" "Oh, I am leaving," I replied, taking a step back down the marble stairs. I did not shed a single tear. I did not raise my voice. I simply turned around and walked back to the waiting black SUV with a graceful, unhurried stride. As I slid into the leather back seat, the driver looked at me through the rearview mirror, awaiting instructions. I pulled out my phone and dialed the private number of my wealth manager. He answered on the second ring. "David," I said, my voice crisp and commanding, completely devoid of the heartbreak I had felt just moments before. "I need you to do 2 things for me right now. First, cancel the emergency black credit card ending in 4829 immediately. Flag all pending charges from today. Second, contact the regional director of the Magnolia Estate. Tell them to completely revoke the VIP family discount for the Wilson wedding taking place right now. They are to charge the full price to the card on file." I hung up the phone, leaned back against the headrest, and watched my parents proudly guarding the doors of the venue, completely unaware that the empire they were so desperate to impress was the very one I owned. The next 3 days were a masterclass in absolute silence. I returned to my penthouse, traded my silk dress for slacks, and went back to running my venture capital firm as if the weekend never happened. My phone remained eerily quiet. No texts checked if I made it home safely. No apologies came for leaving me standing on the front steps like a stranger. My parents were likely too busy basking in the manufactured glory of Tiana and Bradley's fairy tale wedding to care. They had successfully secured their proximity to whiteness and old money, or so they believed. I spent 3 days closing a lucrative tech acquisition and sipping coffee while looking out over the city skyline. The suffocating burden of trying to be the perfect daughter had finally been lifted. I was just waiting for the inevitable explosion. It happened on Tuesday morning, right in the middle of my board meeting. My personal cell phone, a number I only gave to family and close executives, began ringing frantically. The caller ID flashed with my mother's name. I silenced it twice, continuing my presentation. She called a third time, then a fourth, back to back. When she called a fifth time, I calmly excused myself from the conference room, stepped into my office, and pressed accept. "Nia," Brenda screamed into the receiver before I could even say hello. Her voice was shrill, stripped of that polished tone she loved to project around her country club friends. "What did you do to the emergency credit card? Turn it back on right now. This is not funny." I walked over to the floor-to-ceiling window, looking down at the bustling Atlanta streets below. "Good morning to you too, Mom. I am doing well, thanks for asking. I closed that account. It was an emergency card for the family, not a slush fund for your vanity projects. Why are you screaming?" "The wedding venue!" she shrieked, the panic in her voice thick and suffocating. "The manager at the Magnolia Estate just cornered us. The final invoice for the catering, the open bar, and the overtime staff fees just posted. It is $38,000. We tried to put it on the card you left us, and it declined. The manager is threatening to call the police for theft of services. How will you pay for this? Put the card back on right now before the Caldwell family finds out." I let out a soft, genuine laugh. It was rich, deep, and completely unbothered. "How will I pay for this? I am not paying for a wedding I was explicitly banned from attending. You wanted a luxury wedding to impress Bradley's conservative family. You pay for it." There was a scuffle on the other end of the line, followed by the heavy, booming voice of my father. Vernon had grabbed the phone. "Listen to me very carefully, little girl," he growled, using the old patriarchal intimidation tactics that used to terrify me when I was a teenager. "You are going to call your bank right now and authorize this payment. You owe us. When your first business failed and you had absolutely nothing, who took you in, We let you sleep in our basement. We put a roof over your head. You owe this family your loyalty. I gripped the edge of my mahogany desk, my knuckles turning slightly white, but my voice remained as smooth as glass. Let us talk about that basement, Dad. You let me sleep on a deflating air mattress next to the water heater, charging me $800 a month in rent. I scrubbed floors, worked 3 jobs, and paid you on the first without fail. Do you remember what you used my rent money for? Because I do. Silence hung on the line before I continued, my tone slicing through his hypocrisy. You used my hard-earned $800 a month to pay for Bradley's junior membership at the elite golf club. You took money from your struggling black daughter to fund the luxury lifestyle of a mediocre white man who could not afford his own golf clubs, desperate to buy your way into his social circle. You funded Tiana's entire aesthetic with my sweat. I do not owe you a single dime. My debt was paid in full years ago. You selfish, ungrateful brat! Vernon roared, his composure entirely shattered. You are doing this out of jealousy. You are just bitter because Tiana found a successful man, and you are sitting alone with your money. Turn the card back on, or I swear to God, I will ruin your reputation in this city. You cannot ruin a reputation you never helped build, I replied, checking my diamond watch. But since we are talking about business, let me clarify your current situation. I did not just cancel the credit card, Dad. I made a phone call to the venue director. You talked to the venue? Brenda gasped in the background, her voice trembling. What did you say to them, Nia? If you embarrassed us in front of the management, I will never forgive you. I did not have to embarrass you, I said, my voice dropping to a deadly professional register. I just told them to revoke the 30% VIP family discount you were getting. You see, Mom, you really should have paid attention to the corporate restructuring news in Atlanta over the last year. The Magnolia Estate was bought out by a private hospitality group. I am the majority shareholder and the chief executive officer of that group. You stand in my building, you drink my champagne. Then you kicked me off my own property. The silence on the other end of the line was absolute. I could practically hear the oxygen leaving their lungs as reality crashed down on them. The bill is $38,000, I stated, completely devoid of mercy. Pay my company by this Friday or I am sending it to collections. I ended the phone call and immediately tossed my mobile device onto the mahogany desk. The satisfying sharp click of the screen locking felt like the final definitive nail in their proverbial coffin. I stood up, smoothed the invisible wrinkles from my tailored charcoal slacks, walked back into the glass-walled boardroom, and successfully closed a massive 9-figure international merger without missing a single beat. For about 48 hours, I genuinely thought my financial ultimatum had shocked them into absolute submission. I assumed they were frantically scrambling to liquidate whatever small assets they actually owned, or begging Bradley's supposedly wealthy parents for a desperate bailout. I severely underestimated their audacity and their commitment to playing the victim. By Thursday evening, my private phone began vibrating violently across the cool marble kitchen island of my downtown penthouse. It was not a remorseful call from their bank. It was a highly coordinated, completely ruthless, and full-scale digital assault. I unlocked my screen to find 72 unread text messages, 14 missed calls, and a massive flood of social media notifications relentlessly tagging my name. I opened the Instagram application. There, dominating my entire feed, was a heavily edited video of my younger sister. Tiana was sitting on the edge of her luxurious honeymoon suite bed, wearing a pristine white silk robe, weeping directly into the camera lens. She had expertly squeezed out 2 perfectly symmetrical heavy tears that glided effortlessly down her flawless airbrushed makeup. Her voice quivered with manufactured devastation as she spun a masterful web of lies for her thousands of devoted followers. I never thought my own flesh and blood sister would try to destroy the happiest day of my entire life. Tiana sobbed into the lens, dramatically clutching a white tissue to her chest. Nia has always been so bitter, so incredibly jealous of me. When she found out Bradley and I were getting married, she simply could not handle it. She intentionally hacked into the venue's payment system to maliciously decline our credit cards and publicly humiliate my husband's family. She is trying to unlawfully extort us for $38,000 just because she is lonely, single, and miserable. She did not mention the basement. She did not mention the canceled discount or the undeniable fact that they physically barred me from the venue doors. She just played the beautiful victimized bride to absolute perfection. The comments beneath the video were a horrifying cesspool of toxic vitriol. Strangers were rapidly calling me a monster, a jealous spinster, and a bitter disgrace to Black women everywhere. But the uneducated strangers did not bother me at all. It was the incoming messages from my own bloodline that truly showcased the deep rot within my family tree. My phone screen lit once again. It was a lengthy voicemail from Aunt Denise, my mother's oldest sister, and the self-appointed matriarch of all family gossip. I pressed play, letting the harsh audio fill my quiet kitchen. Nia Valerie Wilson, you should be entirely ashamed of yourself. Aunt Denise's raspy voice boomed through the speaker, thick with self-righteous indignation. What on earth is wrong with you? We are a proud Black family. We always protect our own. We absolutely do not tear each other down in front of white folks. Tiana finally secured a good man, a handsome man with high status, and you want to ruin her blessing just because your little businesses never made you a wife. You need to bow down right now, profusely apologize to your sister, and pay that venue bill yourself as a proper wedding gift. If you do not fix this mess immediately, you are spitting on your ancestors and embarrassing your community. I silently stared at the brightly glowing phone screen. This was the exact psychological warfare they had ruthlessly used against me my entire life. They routinely weaponized our culture, maliciously twisting the beautiful concept of community and unity into a heavy, suffocating chain of toxic loyalty. They fully expected me to bleed myself financially dry, to keep Tiana elevated on her shiny pedestal, simply because she chose a traditional path they found socially acceptable. They wanted me to silently endure severe abuse in the name of false family honor. I did not text her back. I did not argue or try to explain my side of the complicated story. I simply pressed the red delete button, erasing Aunt Denise's demanding voice from my life permanently. They were desperately trying to break me through public humiliation, foolishly hoping the intense social pressure would force me to cancel the massive debt and quietly retreat to the shadows. But Friday afternoon inevitably arrived, and the venue's corporate account remained completely unpaid. Intimidation had spectacularly failed, and my desperate parents were rapidly running out of time. At exactly 5 o'clock in the evening, a brief text message from Vernon violently chimed on my bright screen. It was not a frantic plea for an extension. It was a direct, highly aggressive summons. Sunday dinner, 2 o'clock sharp. You will come to this house and you will make this right. If you do not walk through these front doors and fix what you maliciously broke, you are completely dead to us. He actually thought he still held the ultimate power. He foolishly thought the empty threat of permanent exile would terrify me, completely unaware that I had mentally evicted them from my healing heart several days ago. I smiled, feeling a dangerous electric thrill course fiercely through my veins. I calmly walked over to my secure home office safe and retrieved a sleek black leather briefcase. I carefully packed it with heavily redacted corporate bank statements, exclusive ownership deeds, and a few freshly printed background checks my private security team had just finalized. I will certainly be there, Dad, I whispered softly to the empty room, snapping the metal briefcase shut. They wanted a traditional Sunday dinner, and I was going specifically to serve them a feast of absolute ruin. The heavy oak front door of my parents' suburban home was already unlocked when I arrived precisely at 2 o'clock. Stepping into the foyer, the familiar scent of collard greens, candied yams, and roasted chicken hit me immediately. For decades, Sunday dinner in this house was a sacred institution, a time for prayer, connection, and family unity. Today, the comforting smell of soul food was completely overpowered by the suffocating stench of an orchestrated ambush. I walked into the formal dining room, my black leather briefcase gripped firmly in my right hand. The entire extended family was not present here. This was an intimate, highly calculated execution panel designed specifically to break me. My mother, Brenda, and my father, Vernon, were sitting rigidly on one side of the long mahogany table. Tiana sat opposite them, dabbing her completely dry eyes with a monogrammed linen napkin. But the most jarring detail was who occupied the head of the table. Vernon, a proud black man who had spent his entire life demanding absolute respect and submission in his own household, had surrendered the head seat. Bradley, my new white brother-in-law, was lounging in my father's chair like a conquering, very arrogant king. Sitting directly to Bradley's right was a severe-looking older white man in a bespoke pinstripe suit, his briefcase already open displaying thick stacks of legal paper. Bradley smirked when I walked in. "Have a seat, Nia," he instructed, gesturing lazily toward the single empty chair at the far end of the table. He did not bother to stand or greet me. He spoke to me with the slow, exaggerated patience one might use when addressing a toddler throwing a tantrum in a grocery store. "We need to have a serious adult conversation about your behavior this past weekend. I understand." He paused, letting the silence stretch to establish his dominance. "I understand that my background might be a little intimidating for you, coming from generational wealth. My family operates on a very different level of society. We have expectations. We have a legacy to protect. I get it, Nia. I really do. You see Tiana marrying into an old money family, stepping into a world of privilege you cannot access with your little urban startups, and you felt inadequate. But acting out, embarrassing my parents and throwing a jealous temper tantrum by messing with the venue's credit card today." He sighed heavily. "Messing with the credit card processing is simply unacceptable." I looked at my parents. Vernon was nodding in solemn agreement, completely abandoning his own daughter to align himself with Bradley's fabricated superiority. Brenda shot me a venomous glare, silently demanding I bow my head and apologize to the mediocre man sitting in her husband's chair. They were so desperately eager to be associated with white wealth that they were willing to sacrifice my dignity on a silver platter. Tiana sniffled loudly, leaning her head on Bradley's shoulder. "I just wanted a perfect wedding," she whimpered pathetically now. "You tried to destroy the Caldwell family name before I even took it." Before I could even respond to the sheer delusion echoing around the dining room, the man in the pinstripe suit cleared his throat and adjusted his expensive silver glasses. "My name is Richard Sterling," he stated, his voice dripping with intense condescension. "I am a senior partner, and I represent Bradley and Tiana Caldwell. We are not here to entertain your emotional outburst today, Ms. Wilson. We are here to present you with a legally binding ultimatum." He picked up a thick, heavy envelope from the table. He tossed the cream-colored envelope across the polished wood. It slid perfectly, stopping exactly an inch from my fingertips. "That is a formal cease and desist order." Richard Sterling continued, folding his hands and resting them on the table. "Along with a demand for immediate financial restitution. Your fraudulent interference with the Magnolia Estate's billing system caused immense distress to my clients. We are demanding the immediate payment of the $38,000 venue invoice. Furthermore, we require an additional $50,000 transferred to a trust for Tiana, compensating her for the severe emotional distress caused today directly. Compensating her for the public humiliation you inflicted upon her during her wedding weekend," he added sharply. "If those funds are not fully cleared in our escrow account by Tuesday morning, I will personally file a massive civil lawsuit against you for extortion, fraud, and intentional infliction of emotional distress. We will freeze your assets, drag your name through the local press, and bury you in legal fees until you are back sleeping in a basement." Bradley smirked, reaching over to affectionately pat Tiana's hand. "We do not want to destroy you, Nia, but you have to learn today. You have to learn that actions have severe consequences," Bradley said. "You cannot fight people who have real power and real money. Just pay the restitution, apologize to my wife, and we can all move on from this unfortunate ghetto display of jealousy." I did not raise my voice. I did not defend my businesses. I did not yell at my parents for sitting in complete cowardly silence while these two men threatened my entire livelihood in my childhood home. I simply reached out and picked up the heavy cream envelope. The paper was expensive, textured, and beautifully embossed. It was embossed with a shiny gold crest. I slid my manicured thumbnail under the flap, pulled out the crisp legal document, and completely ignored the threatening text in the main body. Instead, I focused my eyes directly on the bold, elegant letterhead printed clearly across the very top of the page. I read the name of the prestigious law firm. I looked at Richard Sterling's smug, punchable face. Then I looked at Bradley's triumphant, condescending smile. A low chuckle rumbled in my chest. I started laughing uncontrollably while the high-priced corporate lawyer just sat there glaring fiercely at me. The sound of my laughter bounced off the crystal chandelier hanging above the long dining table. It was not a nervous giggle or a hysterical shriek. It was the deep, resonant laugh of a woman who had just watched her arrogant enemies walk willingly into a steel trap. Vernon slammed his heavy hand against the mahogany table, making the fine silverware rattle violently against the porcelain plates. He demanded to know what was so funny about a lawsuit that could bankrupt his entire family. Tiana shrank back into her chair, her eyes darting nervously between my face and Bradley's sudden frown. Richard Sterling did not share my amusement at all. He adjusted his expensive silk tie, his face flushing a bright, angry shade of crimson. He leaned forward, attempting to use his large physical presence to intimidate me. He told me that extortion was a felony, and that the legal system would not care about my misplaced arrogance. He promised to make an example out of me, vowing to garnish my wages and seize my business assets until I begged for mercy. I let him finish his little speech, watching the blue vein pulse dangerously in his forehead. I slowly set the cease and desist letter down on the table, tapping my index finger against the gold crest of Pearson and Sterling. I looked directly into his cold eyes, stripping away every ounce of humor from my expression. I asked him a very simple question. I asked Richard Sterling if he had bothered to check his corporate email inbox at 8 o'clock this morning. He blinked, clearly thrown off balance by the abrupt, unexpected shift in the conversation. He scoffed, looking at Bradley for validation, and told me he had been in high-level corporate client meetings all morning long. He proudly stated that he did not have time to check trivial emails when dealing with major civil litigation cases. Bradley smirked again, chiming in to say that I was just stalling for time because I knew I was trapped in a corner. Brenda crossed her arms, muttering that I always resorted to playing foolish games when I was caught misbehaving. I ignored my angry mother completely. I kept my dark eyes locked on the lawyer. I told him that skipping his morning emails was a massive professional mistake. I suggested he take his expensive smartphone out of his tailored pocket right now and read the urgent corporate memo marked priority from the parent holding company. I leaned back in my chair, waiting patiently, while the tension in the room thickened into something almost suffocating. Richard Sterling frowned deeply, but the absolute certainty in my voice made him hesitate. He reluctantly pulled a sleek black phone from his breast pocket, unlocked the screen, and opened his secure work email application. While he scrolled, I took the perfect opportunity to educate the entire room. I explained to Bradley and my parents exactly how modern venture capitalism works. I told them that when I dropped out of college, I did not just build random websites. I built algorithms that identified distressed assets, failing legacy companies that rested on their laurels and bled money behind closed doors. I told them that Pearson and Sterling was simply one of those distressed assets. They had a fancy name, old money clients, and a terrifyingly high amount of silent debt. I revealed that my venture capital firm Vanguard Holdings had spent the last 3 months quietly buying up that debt. We executed a brutal, highly coordinated hostile takeover of the law firm's vulnerable parent holding company late last Friday night. The ink on the acquisition papers had dried just hours before Tiana walked down the aisle. I explained that the urgent memo in his inbox detailed a complete corporate restructuring and immediate freeze on all pro bono or buddy system cases and the introduction of the new controlling board. I watched as my family stared at me in total shock, their minds desperately trying to comprehend the sheer magnitude of my financial reach. I watched the exact beautiful moment Richard Sterling read the signature at the very bottom of that corporate memo. All the color instantly drained from his face, leaving him looking like a ghost in a pinstripe suit. His hands began to visibly tremble, the phone nearly slipping from his grasp and crashing onto the hardwood floor. He looked up at me, his mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water, unable to form a single coherent word. The arrogant, condescending predator who had just threatened to destroy my life finally realized he was sitting across from the woman who owned his entire career. Bradley, completely oblivious to the massive, undeniable power shift that had just occurred, demanded to know what the email said. He grabbed the lawyer's shoulder, roughly ordering him to stop looking at his phone and finish serving the lawsuit so they could get their money. Brenda echoed his demands, yelling at the lawyer to do his job. Richard Sterling yanked his arm away from Bradley, as if he had been burned by a hot iron. He shoved his phone back into his pocket and hastily began gathering his scattered legal documents, his breathing becoming ragged and shallow. He shoved the paperwork into his briefcase with frantic, uncoordinated movements, completely ignoring the confused shouts coming from Bradley and my parents. I leaned across the table, my voice dropping to a sharp, lethal whisper that cut through the noise of the dining room. I told him that representing a con artist in a frivolous extortion attempt against his own employer was a direct violation of our new corporate ethics policy. I lifted my right hand and pointed my index finger firmly toward the front door. You have exactly 10 seconds to leave my sight before you are permanently disbarred for ethical violations. The older, terrified lawyer turned completely ghost white, grabbed his heavy leather briefcase, and ran out the door, leaving Bradley stunned. The heavy front door slammed shut with a definitive, echoing thud, leaving a profound and suffocating silence in its wake. Bradley sat perfectly still for 3 long seconds, his blue eyes darting wildly toward the empty hallway where his expensive corporate lawyer had just fled. The realization that he had lost his primary weapon of intimidation finally crashed through his thick skull. His initial shock rapidly mutated into a violent, uncontrollable rage. He lunged forward and slammed his clenched fist down onto the polished mahogany dining table with terrifying force. The impact sent my mother's fine crystal water glasses tipping over, spilling ice and water across the expensive lace table runner. Tiana shrieked, pulling her hands back to her chest, but Bradley did not even glance at his new bride. He locked his furious, unhinged gaze entirely on me, his face contorting into an ugly sneer. "You think you are so smart, do you not?" Bradley screamed, a thick vein bulging visibly on his pale neck. "You think buying out some law firm makes you untouchable? You are nothing, Nia. You are just a loud, arrogant woman playing with new money. My family has generational wealth. We have a massive trust fund that has been growing since before your ancestors were even allowed to own property. I will personally use every single dime of my inheritance to crush your little urban businesses into dust. I will bankrupt your entire venture capital firm and make sure you never work in this city again." Instead of condemning a grown man for violently slamming his fist on her dining table and disrespecting her eldest daughter, my mother immediately rushed to his defense. Brenda reached over and gently patted his arm, casting a look of absolute disgust in my direction. "Bradley is absolutely right, Nia," she scolded me, her voice dripping with venomous disappointment. "You have no idea who you are dealing with. The Caldwell family represents true American excellence. They are old money. When Tiana brought Bradley home, he elevated this entire family's social standing overnight. Do you really have any idea how much respect we get at the church now? The senior pastor finally invited your father to sit on the executive board, all because we are officially connected to the Caldwell legacy." Vernon aggressively pointed a thick finger at my face, eager to prove his blind loyalty to his white son-in-law. "Bradley has pedigree," my father boasted proudly, completely ignoring the fact that his own daughter was a self-made multimillionaire sitting right across from him. "He brings class and sophistication to this family tree. You are just a temporary glitch in the corporate world, Nia. Your money is aggressive and loud, just like your behavior. Bradley's wealth is quiet, established, and permanent. He gave your sister the ultimate fairy tale wedding to prove his devotion. You should be down on your knees thanking him for bringing a touch of real prestige to our bloodline, instead of chasing away his legal counsel with your hostile ghetto tactics." Tiana, emboldened by our parents' unwavering support for her husband, sat up a little straighter. She brushed a piece of lint off her designer blouse and looked at me with deep theatrical pity. "You are just so bitter, Nia," she sighed, shaking her head. "You cannot stand the fact that I married into a wealthy, powerful family while you spend all your time alone in some sterile office building. Bradley has a massive trust fund waiting for him when he turns 35 next month. We are going to buy a mansion in the historic district. We are going to travel the world. You are just trying to sabotage my happiness, because no man of his caliber would ever look twice at a woman as harsh and masculine as you. I sat quietly absorbing the sheer magnitude of their collective delusion. It was a fascinating, horrifying psychological study in internalized racism and classism. My own parents were eagerly tearing down their successful black daughter to protect the fragile ego of a white man simply because he represented an aesthetic they desperately craved. They had fully bought into the illusion of his old money heritage without ever demanding a single shred of actual proof. They were so blinded by their toxic desire to assimilate into the upper echelons of suburban high society that they willingly offered me up as a sacrificial lamb. I did not feel angry anymore. I felt a cold surgical precision wash over my mind. I was going to surgically remove the cancer of their ignorance right here and right now. I took a slow, deliberate sip of my sweet iced tea, letting the cold liquid soothe my throat. I set the glass down softly, wiping a stray drop of condensation from my fingers. I looked at Vernon, then at Brenda, and finally rested my unwavering gaze on the sweating, furious man sitting at the head of the table. Generational wealth, I repeated softly, letting the syllables roll off my tongue. A massive trust fund, a Caldwell family legacy. I reached down and placed my sleek black leather briefcase squarely on the center of the mahogany dining table. The metallic clicks of the dual locks snapping open echoed loudly in the tense quiet room, sending a sharp chill down my spine as I prepared my final move. You all seem confident in Bradley's prestigious financial portfolio. You truly believe his background makes him vastly superior to the daughter you raised in your own home. You allowed him to disrespect me because you thought his bank account shielded him from the consequences of his own severe mediocrity. Let us talk about your massive trust fund, Bradley. I pulled a thick stack of printed financial documents from my briefcase and dropped them directly in front of my sister. Tiana, before you start planning your world travels, did he ever bother to tell you why his personal credit score is 420? The silence in the dining room was so absolute, you could hear the gentle hum of the central air conditioning unit. Tiana stared at me, her perfectly manicured hands freezing mid-air. Bradley's face lost all its previous arrogance, rapidly transforming into a mask of pure, unadulterated panic. "What are you talking about?" Tiana whispered, her voice trembling as she looked back and forth between me and her new husband. "I am talking about the reality behind the illusion," I said, reaching into my open briefcase. I pulled out 4 thick, meticulously organized, glossy folders and slid one to each person at the table: Vernon, Brenda, Tiana, and Bradley. When my hospitality group acquired the Magnolia Estate, I initiated a standard corporate audit of all outstanding debts. That included a thorough, legally binding background check on the people trying to defraud my company for $38,000. You see, Bradley, when you sign a luxury venue contract and put down a massive deposit, you legally consent to a comprehensive financial screening. What my security team found was incredibly enlightening. Vernon hesitantly opened the thick folder, his breathing becoming shallow. Brenda leaned heavily over his shoulder, her brow furrowed in deep, terrified confusion. "Bradley is not old money," I stated clearly, leaning forward and letting the absolute truth shatter the suffocating pretension in the room once and for all. "He does not have a massive trust fund waiting for him when he turns 35 next month. He does not have a family legacy of generational wealth. What he does have is exactly $150,000 in crippling credit card debt and defaulted personal loans. That customized Porsche he drives around the upscale suburbs to impress your wealthy church friends is just a standard lease, and he has not made a single payment on it in 3 long months. The repossession agency is currently looking for it right now." Bradley slammed his hands on the dining table again, but this time there was absolutely no physical power behind the violent gesture. It was just the frantic, desperate flailing of a cornered animal. "This is a complete lie. She forged these documents. Tiana, do not look at that garbage," he shouted aggressively, trying to snatch the heavy folder away from his terrified wife. But Tiana held on to the folder with a surprisingly tight, unwavering grip. She flipped to the second page, her tear-filled eyes scanning the highlighted bank statements and collections notices. The warm color drained completely from her cheeks, leaving her looking physically ill. "Bradley," she gasped, her voice cracking painfully. "This shows 3 maxed-out credit cards. It shows a severe default notice from a cheap apartment complex in Florida. You explicitly told me you owned a luxury condo down there. You promised me your grandfather left you a massive estate." "He lied to you, Tiana," I said softly, feeling a brief fleeting pang of pity for my younger sister before cold logic took over again. "But he is a very strategic, highly manipulative liar. He specifically targets insecure, status-obsessed Black families who are desperately searching for proximity to whiteness to validate their own fragile social standing in this incredibly judgmental community. And Mom and Dad proudly served you up to him on a gleaming silver platter." I turned my full attention to Brenda and Vernon. They were staring at the printed paperwork as if it were written in a completely alien language. "When you two started bringing Bradley around, you did everything in your earthly power to make him believe we were a wealthy Black dynasty. You purposely exaggerated my father's corporate salary. You continuously bragged about the size of this house. You falsely claimed that Tiana was the sole heiress to a massive family fortune. You literally painted a giant glowing $sign on your favorite daughter's back just to catch a white man with a good haircut, a tailored suit, and a completely fake backstory. Bradley married you because he genuinely thought you were going to bail him out of his miserable, debt-ridden existence." "You set me up!" Bradley suddenly screamed, pointing a trembling accusatory finger directly at Vernon. The sheer audacity of his outburst made me sit back in my heavy chair. He was actually trying to play the ultimate helpless victim in a scam he created. "You promised me she came from endless money. You told me this specific family had incredibly deep pockets and powerful social connections. I married her because you actively swore she had a massive trust fund of her own waiting for her." "You married me for my money!" Tiana shrieked, jumping up abruptly from her dining chair. The custom silk blouse she wore looked suddenly pathetic as she trembled with absolute rage and profound humiliation. "I deeply loved you. I gave you absolutely everything. I pushed my own sister out of our expensive wedding because you said her natural hair would deeply offend your rich conservative parents. Your parents do not even own a company. Your parents work at a local grocery store in rural Ohio." "Shut up, Tiana!" Bradley yelled back, dropping the charming, highly sophisticated facade entirely. His true, incredibly toxic nature was finally on full public display. He looked around the silent room, quickly realizing he had absolutely no escape route and no high-priced lawyer to legally protect him. His eyes landed squarely on my father, who was still gripping the financial records with violently shaking hands. Bradley let out a harsh, incredibly desperate laugh that echoed in the tense space. He deflected the blame with a single devastating sentence that would completely destroy my parents' long 30-year marriage forever. "Do not act like you are the innocent victims here. You want to talk about who is truly broke? Ask your precious high and mighty father how he paid off my aggressive creditors last month. Your beloved dad gave me his entire retirement funds to cover my debts." The words hung heavy in the silent dining room like a live grenade that had just detonated. For a fraction of a second, nobody breathed. Then the absolute chaos erupted, shattering the pristine, polished illusion of my family's suburban dynasty once and for all. Brenda let out a sound that was half gasp, half scream. She pushed herself back from the mahogany table so violently that her heavy wooden chair tipped backward, crashing onto the hardwood floor with a deafening bang. "Vernon!" My mother shrieked, her voice cracking under the weight of the massive betrayal. "Tell me he is lying. Tell me right now that this pathetic, broke little boy is lying to my face. You did not touch our retirement accounts, Vernon. We have been saving that money for 30 years. You promised me we were going to use that money to travel the world." Vernon sat completely frozen, his large frame shrinking into the high-backed chair. He opened his mouth to speak, but only a pathetic raspy stutter emerged from his throat. He looked at Brenda, then darted his eyes toward Tiana, and finally glared at Bradley with pure venomous hatred. But he could not deny it. The heavy, suffocating guilt radiating from his entire body was a full, undeniable confession. I had to do it, Brenda. Vernon finally choked out, his voice defensive but shaking. Bradley was going to lose the luxury lease on the Porsche right before the wedding. His creditors were threatening to sue him publicly. How would that look to the church? How would that look to the Caldwell family? They are supposed to be old money. I was just trying to protect Tiana's social standing. I was trying to protect our family's legacy. He promised me his trust fund would reimburse every single penny with interest. The second he turned 35, I thought it was an investment. There is no trust fund, Tiana screamed, burying her face in her hands. Her immaculate silk blouse heaved with deep, ugly sobs. She turned her tear-streaked face toward Bradley, who was now backing away toward the dining room doorway, eager to escape the explosion he had just caused. You ruined my life. You are nothing but a broke, lying con artist. You let my father drain his life savings so you could pretend to be a wealthy gentleman. I married a complete fraud. I hate you. Bradley scowled, adjusting his tailored jacket with a nervous, jerky movement. Do not act like you are an innocent victim, Tiana. You and your parents are obsessed with status. You wanted the white picket fence and the country club aesthetic so badly that you practically threw your bank accounts at me. You bought the illusion because you hated yourselves. You needed my whiteness to feel superior in your little suburban bubble. Do not blame me for your own pathetic insecurities. I sat perfectly still, my hands folded neatly on the table, watching the devastating fallout of their own toxic choices. He is right, I said, my voice dangerously calm and slicing through the chaotic shouting. He is absolutely right, and that is the most pathetic part of this entire tragedy. Brenda whipped her head toward me, tears of rage spilling down her cheeks. Shut your mouth, Nia. Do not you dare gloat over our destruction. This is all your fault. I am not gloating, Mom. I am pointing out the terrifying depth of your own internalized racism and classism, I replied, refusing to break eye contact. Look at what you did. You rejected your own flesh and blood. You threw away a highly successful, self-made black daughter. You banned me from a wedding, mocked my natural hair, and called my corporate career a failure. Why? Because I did not fit into your desperate, whitewashed fantasy of suburban prestige. I stood up slowly, pushing my chair back with a loud, grating scrape. You were so hungry for the aesthetic of old money whiteness that you willingly handed over your life savings to a mediocre, broke, unemployed white man. You funded his fake lifestyle just so you could parade him around the country club and your church like a shiny trophy. You completely ignored every red flag because his skin color and his lies promised you a VIP ticket into a world that does not even want you. You sacrificed your own financial security and your own daughter to buy a seat at a table that was entirely made of cardboard. Tiana pointed a shaking finger at me. You knew, she cried, her voice ragged and desperate. You ran the background checks. You knew he was a fraud, and you sat there and let me marry him anyway. You did this to me. You wanted me to be humiliated. I did not walk you down the aisle, Tiana, I shot back smoothly. I tried to attend your wedding, remember? I brought a gift. I came with love. You chose to turn your back on me, while Bradley handed you champagne paid for by your father's stolen retirement funds. You sealed your own fate. Vernon abruptly pushed himself up from his chair. The humiliation of being exposed as a foolish, gullible old man had entirely morphed into a blinding, irrational rage. He could not attack Bradley, who had already slipped out the front door during my speech. He could not attack Brenda, who was sobbing uncontrollably. So he turned his ultimate fury onto the only target he had ever known how to abuse me. His face turned a deep, dangerous shade of purple. He marched toward me, his hands balled into tight fists, his chest heaving with explosive anger. Get out of my house! Vernon roared, his voice echoing violently off the high ceilings. You did this. You brought these documents into my home to humiliate me. You have ruined this family forever. I never want to see your face again. You are evicted. Get out of my house right now, this very second. I did not flinch. I did not cower, and I certainly did not break eye contact with the man who had just screamed in my face. Vernon stood over me, his chest heaving with exertion, his hands balled into tight, shaking fists at his sides. He fully expected me to shrink into the submissive, apologetic daughter he had spent 34 years trying to mold. He wanted me to grab my sleek black briefcase, lower my head in absolute shame, and run out the front door in a flood of pathetic tears. Instead, I calmly reached across the pristine white lace table runner and picked up my tall crystal glass of sweet iced tea. I felt the cold, wet condensation against my fingertips as I slowly brought the rim to my lips. I took a long, deliberate sip, savoring the icy sweetness, before gently placing the heavy glass back onto the polished coaster. The loud clink of the crystal meeting the wood echoed like a gunshot in the silent, tense room. Brenda stopped her hysterical sobbing for a moment, staring at me with wide, completely bewildered eyes. Tiana remained frozen in her chair, her tear-streaked face pale and terrified. Vernon narrowed his furious eyes, his jaw tightening so hard I thought his teeth might crack under the immense pressure. "Did you not hear me?" Vernon growled, taking another aggressive step toward my chair. "I told you to get out of my house, Nia. You have caused enough damage for one lifetime. Leave." I leaned back in my chair, crossing my right leg elegantly over my left. I smoothed a tiny invisible wrinkle from my emerald green silk dress. "I heard every single word you said, Dad," I replied, my voice projecting a cool, unshakable authority that made him hesitate. "I heard you blame me for your own massive financial failures. I heard you defend a mediocre white con artist over your own flesh and blood. I heard you tell me to get out of your house. But there is a very critical, highly legal flaw in your aggressive demand." I paused, letting the profound weight of my words settle heavily over the dining room table. "This is not your house," I stated clearly. Vernon let out a harsh, dismissive bark of laughter. He looked at Brenda, then back at me, shaking his head in sheer disbelief. "You have completely lost your mind. I bought this property 20 years ago. My name is on the original deed. You are having a psychological breakdown because you are so consumed by jealousy. Your name was on the original deed." I corrected him smoothly, holding up a single index finger to stop his incoming rant. "Let us take a brief walk down memory lane, shall we? Let us go back exactly 3 years ago. The economy took a slight downturn, and your logistics company lost 2 major municipal contracts. You panicked. You were absolutely terrified of losing your prestigious standing at the church and your elite status at the country club. So, instead of adjusting your lavish lifestyle, you secretly stopped making the monthly mortgage payments on this beautiful suburban fortress." Brenda gasped loudly, her hands flying to cover her open mouth. She whipped her head toward her husband. "Vernon, is that true?" Vernon swallowed hard, a fresh layer of nervous sweat breaking out across his forehead. "Do not listen to her, Brenda. She is just trying to cause trouble." "I am just reciting the documented facts," I continued relentlessly. "You hid the bright red foreclosure notices from Mom. You intercepted the aggressive phone calls from the bank. You were drowning Dad. You were mere weeks away from the local sheriff showing up at the front door to throw all of this expensive custom furniture out onto the front lawn for all the wealthy neighbors to see. You were desperate to save face. So, when a private real estate holding company called Zenith Properties reached out and offered to quietly buy the distressed debt from the bank and allow you to stay in the home, you signed the paperwork immediately. You did not even read the fine print. You were just thrilled to keep your precious illusion of wealth completely intact." Tiana looked at her father in sheer horror. "Dad, you sold the house. We do not own the estate." "It was a strategic financial restructuring," Vernon stammered desperately, trying to maintain his crumbling authority. "I still pay the lease. I am the head of this household." "You pay a symbolic, heavily subsidized lease," I corrected him, my voice turning to pure ice. "You pay exactly $800 a month, the exact same amount you charged me to sleep on a deflating air mattress in your damp basement when I was desperately trying to launch my first software company." I thought $800 was a very fitting poetic number. The entire room went completely still. The realization hit Vernon like a runaway freight train. He stumbled backward, his knees hitting the edge of his heavy dining chair. He gripped the polished wood for support, his eyes wide with absolute, unadulterated terror. "Zenith Properties," Vernon whispered, his voice trembling uncontrollably. "Zenith Properties is a subsidiary limited liability company entirely owned and operated by Vanguard Holdings." I confirmed, offering him a sharp, merciless smile. "I am Vanguard Holdings. I bought your debt. I paid off the bank. I own the deed to this entire property." I have let you live here rent-free, heavily subsidizing your pathetic fake lifestyle, while you actively treated me like absolute garbage. You funded Bradley's fraudulent existence while living entirely on my silent charity. I reached into my briefcase one final time. I pulled out a crisp, brightly colored legal document bearing the official seal of the county court. I tossed it onto the table, letting it slide directly into the center of the spilled ice water. You cannot evict the landlord, Dad, I said, my voice echoing with absolute undeniable power. You all have 30 days to pack your bags. I did not wait for a single response to my eviction notice. I simply turned my back on the stunned silence that had fallen over the dining room and began walking toward the grand foyer. My emerald green silk dress swished quietly around my ankles, a stark contrast to the absolute devastation I was leaving in my wake. Before my hand even touched the heavy brass handle of the front door, the paralyzing shock behind me completely shattered. The sound of my mother's hysterical screaming tore through the house. I heard the violent, unmistakable crash of fine porcelain plates shattering against the hardwood floor. Someone, likely Tiana, was sobbing so loudly she was choking on her own breath. Vernon was roaring, his deep voice cracking as he cursed Bradley, cursing the debt and ultimately cursing his own blinding pride. I pulled the heavy door open, stepped out onto the pristine brick porch and pulled it shut behind me, completely cutting off the toxic symphony of their self-inflicted destruction. The warm evening air hit my face, and for the first time in 34 years, I took a deep, genuinely free breath. My driver was waiting right where I had left him, holding the rear door of the black SUV open. I slid into the quiet, temperature-controlled sanctuary of the leather back seat. As the vehicle pulled smoothly out of the neighborhood, passing the identical, manicured lawns of families who desperately cared about keeping up appearances, my phone began to vibrate violently in my purse. I pulled it out and watched the notifications flood the screen. There were missed calls from frantic text messages from Brenda, and desperate, angry voicemails from Aunt Denise and Uncle Marcus, who had clearly just been informed of the bloodbath that had occurred at Sunday dinner. 54 missed calls in the span of 20 minutes. A year ago, seeing that many notifications from my family would have sent me into a spiral of severe anxiety. I would have felt the immediate, crushing pressure to answer, to apologize, to smooth things over, and to sacrifice my own peace just to keep the family unit intact. But tonight I simply watched the screen light up, feeling absolutely nothing but a profound clinical detachment. I pressed the power button, muting the device entirely, and tossed it onto the empty seat beside me. I had finally severed the emotional umbilical cord. For my entire life, I had allowed them to dictate my worth. I had believed that if I just worked hard enough, if I just built a big enough company, they would finally look at me with the same blind, unconditional adoration they gave Tiana. But tonight proved that their love was never a prize to be won. It was a weapon they used to control me. I leaned my head against the cool tinted window, watching the city lights blur past as we drove onto the highway. I thought about the thousands of dollars they had flushed down the drain to impress a white man who viewed them as a convenient, gullible bank. I thought about the sheer terrifying audacity of my parents kicking me out of a wedding while living in a house I secretly paid for. The generational curse of seeking validation from people committed to misunderstanding you was officially broken in my bloodline. I did not need to perform for them anymore. I did not need to shrink my success to make them comfortable in their mediocrity. I had built a massive venture capital empire from the ground up, navigating boardrooms filled with ruthless corporate sharks, and yet the most exhausting battle I had ever fought was at my own parents' dining table. When the SUV finally pulled into the secure underground parking garage of my downtown penthouse building, I felt an overwhelming wave of exhaustion wash over me. The adrenaline that had fueled my confrontation with Richard Sterling Bradley and my parents was rapidly leaving my system. I took the private elevator straight up to the top floor, stepping into the quiet, expansive luxury of my own home. There were no fake smiles here. There was no walking on eggshells. I poured myself a glass of expensive red wine, walked out onto the massive balcony overlooking the glittering city skyline, and simply enjoyed the profound, uninterrupted silence of my victory. I slept better that night than I had in a decade. I woke up the next morning feeling incredibly refreshed, ready to tackle a full day of executive meetings and international investment calls. I was in my custom walk-in closet, selecting a tailored white blazer for the day, when my personal cell phone rang. It was an incoming call from David, my head of corporate security, at the Vanguard Holdings main office tower. I swiped to answer, expecting a routine update about my arrival time. Instead, David's voice was tense, urgent, and strictly professional. "Ms. Wilson, I apologize for the early interruption, but we have a severe security situation escalating in the main lobby right now," David stated quickly. "A white male identifying himself as Bradley Caldwell has bypassed the first security checkpoint. He is currently screaming at the front desk staff, making aggressive threats and violently demanding to see you. He is causing a massive scene, and he claims he is going to the press. Do you want me to authorize the team to physically remove him, or should we call the police to handle the disturbance?" I paused, looking at my reflection in the full-length mirror. The absolute audacity of this broke, pathetic con artist showing up at my place of business after being exposed for the fraud. He truly was astounded me. He still thought his false sense of white privilege could intimidate me on my own territory. I smiled coldly, picking up my luxury leather briefcase. I instructed David to keep the lobby, ensuring the security cameras recorded his ultimate downfall. I walked swiftly from my custom walk-in closet to the private home office adjacent to my bedroom. My penthouse was wired directly into Vanguard Holdings' central security matrix. I tapped a sequence on my sleek glass desk, and a massive flat-screen monitor instantly flared to life, displaying crystal-clear 4K resolution footage of the main corporate lobby. The audio feed crackled softly, bringing the chaotic sounds of the ground floor directly into my quiet, secure sanctuary. Bradley was pacing frantically in front of the sweeping marble reception desk. He looked absolutely nothing like the polished, condescending gentleman who had sat at my parents' dining table just a few short weeks ago. His tailored suit jacket was wrinkled and missing a button. His tie hung loosely around his damp neck, and his face was flushed a dangerous, blotchy red. He was jabbing his finger aggressively toward my frightened receptionist, demanding that I come down and face him like a coward. David, my formidable head of security, stood perfectly still, flanked by two equally imposing guards. They formed an impenetrable human wall between Bradley and the secure elevators leading to the executive suites. Bradley was pacing back and forth, entirely fueled by a toxic cocktail of desperation and unchecked audacity. He truly believed that his sheer entitlement would force my highly trained corporate staff to simply bow down and grant him an audience. He glared at David, attempting to use his physical presence to intimidate a man who had spent a decade in private military contracting. It was pathetic to watch. I picked up my secure office phone, dialed the direct line to David's discreet earpiece, and leaned back in my leather chair. I instructed David to maintain a defensive perimeter, to absolutely not engage physically unless Bradley crossed the velvet stanchions, and to make sure the lobby microphones picked up every single word leaving that con artist's mouth. Bradley, realizing that physical intimidation was failing miserably, switched to his ultimate weapon. He stopped pacing, threw his arms out wide, and began screaming his threats for the entire bustling lobby to hear. He announced that he had local journalists and prominent bloggers on speed dial. He yelled that he was going to expose me to the national press as a bitter, militant, racist black woman who was actively trying to destroy her innocent sister's beautiful interracial marriage. He threatened to spin a tragic, highly publicized narrative that I was a jealous spinster who used my vast corporate wealth to deliberately target and bankrupt a hard-working white man simply because of the color of his skin. He demanded exactly $100,000 in unmarked cash transferred immediately to an offshore account, or he would go live on social media and ensure Vanguard Holdings faced a catastrophic public relations nightmare that would tank my entire investment portfolio. I sat in my penthouse office watching this spectacular self-destructive meltdown with absolute fascination. Bradley thought he was delivering a masterclass in corporate extortion. In reality, he was happily providing me with irrefutable high-definition evidence of a major felony. Extortion, harassment, and public disturbance were all being meticulously logged onto secure cloud servers with multiple backups. I was banking on the historical assumption that a successful black woman would be terrified of a public scandal, that I would quickly write a massive check just to protect my hard-earned reputation from his malicious, racially charged smear campaign. He fundamentally misunderstood the kind of empire I had built. My reputation was not built on fragile social compliance. It was built on ruthless, undeniable legal precision. I pressed the communication button on my desk console, my voice cool and even. I told David that we had captured enough viable evidence for the district attorney and authorized him to proceed with the final phase of our containment protocol. Less than 2 minutes later, the heavy revolving glass doors of the Vanguard Holdings lobby spun open. 3 uniformed city police officers strode purposefully into the building. David had discreetly triggered the silent emergency alarm the exact moment Bradley had first bypassed the visitor checkpoint. The officers immediately assessed the volatile situation, zeroing in on the erratic, screaming man who was violently harassing the corporate staff. Bradley spun around as the police approached, his arrogant expression faltering for a brief second before he attempted to deploy his fake old money charm. He smoothed his wrinkled suit jacket plastered on a remarkably fake smile and tried to calmly explain to the officers that there had simply been a minor familial misunderstanding regarding a business contract. He expected his manufactured prestige to shield him from basic legal consequences. The officers, however, were thoroughly unimpressed by his sudden miraculous shift in tone. They had clearly heard his loud, aggressive extortion threats from the moment they entered the echoing marble lobby. The lead officer firmly instructed Bradley to turn around and place his hands behind his back. Bradley's charming facade instantly shattered into a million pieces. He began shouting violently, resisting the officer's firm grip, and loudly declaring that his civil rights were being egregiously violated. As he thrashed his arms in a desperate, futile attempt to escape the inevitable handcuffs, his expensive, likely stolen smartphone slipped from his sweaty grasp. The device clattered loudly against the polished marble floor, sliding directly to a stop near David's polished black tactical boots. The sharp click of the metal handcuffs finally subduing Bradley echoed through the audio feed. David calmly reached down and picked up the dropped smartphone. The screen was severely cracked from the impact, but the display suddenly illuminated with a bright, urgent notification. David read the message, his professional expression instantly hardening into a mask of pure, unadulterated disgust. He looked directly up into the closest security camera, holding the illuminated screen perfectly steady toward the high-definition lens. I leaned forward in my chair, tapping my keyboard to zoom the camera feed tightly onto the shattered glass display. The text message was from Tiana. The stark, terrifying words burned themselves into my memory. My younger sister had typed, "Did you get Nia's social security number and corporate tax identification digits yet? The private loan officer needs them by noon, or the bank will not approve the new mortgage application." I stared at the shattered phone screen, the sheer magnitude of their desperation settling over me like a heavy, suffocating blanket. Tiana and Bradley were not just pathetic social climbers anymore. They had officially crossed a very dangerous line into federal territory. Attempting to steal my corporate tax identification digits and my highly sensitive social security number to secure a fraudulent mortgage was a massive criminal offense. I immediately picked up my secure line to David. I instructed him to place the physical device into a sealed evidence bag, maintain a strict documented chain of custody, and hand it directly over to my lead corporate attorney, Marcus. There would be absolutely no quiet family settlement for this blatant transgression. They wanted to play high-stakes games with my identity to fund their fake luxury lifestyle. I was going to let the federal authorities teach them exactly how the real world operated. I closed the security monitor, feeling a profound sense of absolute closure. The legal trap was definitively set. Marcus would spend the rest of the afternoon drafting the criminal complaints and coordinating directly with the district attorney's office to ensure maximum prosecution for both of them. Just as I poured myself a fresh cup of dark roast coffee and sat back down at my glass desk to review an upcoming corporate merger, the intercom on my wall chimed urgently. The concierge from the ground floor lobby announced that a woman identifying herself as my mother was currently downstairs causing a mild disturbance and aggressively demanding to be led up to my penthouse. I checked the building security feed once again. Brenda was pacing furiously back and forth by the polished elevator banks. Her usual pristine country club appearance was completely undone. Her designer silk scarf was sitting askew on her neck. Her expensive makeup looked hastily applied, and her eyes were darting around the modern lobby with desperate, unchecked anxiety. She had clearly just witnessed Bradley being hauled out of the building in handcuffs by the city police and finally realized that the protective bubble of my silent charity had definitively popped. I instructed the concierge to grant her access to my private elevator. If she wanted to beg, I wanted to look her right in the eyes while she did it. The heavy elevator doors slid open exactly 1 minute later, depositing my mother directly into the sleek, expansive foyer of my home. Brenda took 2 hesitant, shaky steps forward, her eyes scanning the expensive modern art and the panoramic floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the sprawling Atlanta skyline. For a fleeting, highly revealing second, I saw raw, unadulterated jealousy flash across her face before she hastily replaced it with a dramatic mask of maternal agony. She crumpled onto my plush white leather sofa, immediately launching into a theatrical display of heavy, gasping sobs. She did not ask how I was doing. She did not ask about the violent scene Bradley had just caused downstairs or if I was safe. She immediately played the absolute only card she thought she had left in her empty hand. She began loudly invoking the sacred, cherished memory of my late grandmother, Hazel. My mother cried hysterically that I was deliberately tearing apart the deep ancestral roots of our family. She begged me to tear up the court-approved 30-day eviction notice, pleading that our family name would be irreparably dragged through the mud if the wealthy suburban neighbors saw their belongings piled up on the curb. She begged me to just quietly pay off Bradley's massive debts to avoid a messy, humiliating public scandal, claiming that my beloved grandmother would be actively turning in her grave to see her descendants fighting like common street enemies. This was her classic signature move. Growing up, whenever I expressed a firm boundary or demanded basic respect, Brenda would immediately weaponize my grandmother's legacy of Black family unity to force me into silent, obedient submission. She constantly used our beautiful culture as a convenient heavy bludgeon to keep me shrinking myself for their overall comfort. I stood casually leaning against my marble kitchen island, taking slow sips of my coffee and letting her completely exhaust herself. Her tears were entirely synthetic. She was not crying for the family's honor. She was crying because she was about to permanently lose her prestigious country club membership and her rent-free mansion. "You have to fix this horrible mess, Nia," Brenda wept, reaching a trembling, manicured hand out toward me. "You are the strong one. You have always been the capable one in this family. You have far more money than you could ever possibly spend. Just write the check. Save your sister's broken marriage. Save your father's fading dignity. Do it for the undeniable honor of this family. Do it for the community. We need you." I set my coffee mug down on the cold marble counter with a sharp clink. I walked slowly toward the living room, retrieved my smartphone from my tailored blazer pocket, and sat down in the velvet armchair directly across from her. I did not offer her a tissue. I did not offer her a single ounce of comfort. I simply opened a high-quality audio file that my head of corporate security had discreetly extracted from the venue's surveillance system during the exact wedding I was aggressively kicked out of. "You really want to talk about protecting the family honor, Mom?" I asked, my voice deadly calm and entirely devoid of emotion. I pressed play on the audio file, and the crisp, clear sound of my mother's voice instantly filled the quiet, luxurious penthouse. The recording perfectly captured Brenda, standing in the venue courtyard, laughing haughtily with Bradley's fake rich parents. Through the speakers, my mother's recorded voice scoffed explicitly, telling the Caldwell family that her eldest daughter was an embarrassing, uneducated failure who ran silly ghetto hustles, entirely dismissing my billion-dollar corporate empire just to make herself sound more appealing to a table of racist strangers. I paused the recording, letting the devastating heavy silence stretch endlessly between us, as the last of Brenda's fake tears instantly dried up in sheer, unadulterated terror. Where was my honor then? Brenda stared at the phone in my hand as if it were a venomous snake preparing to strike. The agonizing silence stretched through the penthouse, broken only by the faint hum of the central air conditioning. All of the theatrical tears, the dramatic gasping, and the desperate invocations of my late grandmother vanished in a single instant. The soft maternal mask she had worn since stepping out of the elevator completely melted away, revealing the cold, calculating woman I had known my entire life. She straightened her posture, smoothing her designer silk scarf. "You recorded me," Brenda whispered, her voice stripped of all its previous warmth, dropping into a harsh register. "You actually planted spies at your own sister's wedding just to record your mother speaking in confidence. You are a sick, twisted, cold-hearted monster, Nia." "I did not plant spies, Mom," I replied calmly, tucking the smartphone back into my tailored blazer pocket. "I own the venue. The security cameras record everything for liability purposes. I just happened to check the audio logs to see exactly how long it took for you to start trashing my name to strangers. It took exactly 14 minutes. They were not strangers. They were Bradley's parents," Brenda shouted, her face twisting into a vicious sneer. "They are respectable high society people. What was I supposed to tell them? That my eldest daughter is a defiant, disrespectful rebel who refuses to fall in line. You have always been an embarrassment to this family. You never cared about our reputation. You never cared about us. You are ungrateful. After everything your father and I sacrificed to give you a decent life, this is how you repay us, by throwing us out on the street." "You did not sacrifice for me," I said, leaning forward in my velvet armchair, my voice remaining perfectly even despite the raging fire in my chest. "You sacrificed me for your own comfort. There is a massive, undeniable difference. You took my rent money to buy golf clubs for a white man who was secretly drowning in debt. You smiled and nodded while he disrespected our culture just because his fake background made you feel superior. You banished me from a wedding because my hair did not fit your aesthetic." Brenda stood up abruptly, her fists clenched tightly at her sides. "You are just jealous. You have always been bitterly jealous of Tiana because she is beautiful, compliant, and actually knows how to keep a man. You think your corporate money makes you better than us, but you are nothing but a lonely, miserable woman sitting in an empty glass tower. You do not know the first thing about family loyalty." "I know everything about family loyalty," I corrected her, standing up to meet her furious gaze. "I know that true family loyalty does not require me to set myself on fire just to keep you warm. I know that conditional love is not love at all. It is just a cruel transactional business deal. You only loved me when I was making myself small enough to make you look big. The second I outgrew the tiny box you put me in, I became the villain. I am protecting my peace." Brenda sneered, taking a menacing step toward me. "You are making a colossal mistake, Nia. If you kick us out of that house, if you let Bradley ruin us, you will be permanently dead to this entire family. I will make sure no one in Atlanta ever speaks to you again." "You cannot fire me, Mom. I quit," I said, walking over to the marble kitchen island and pressing the glowing intercom button. "David, please send an escort up to the penthouse immediately. My guest is leaving." "You are calling security on your own mother," Brenda shrieked, genuine shock finally piercing through her aggressive rage. "I am calling security on a hostile trespasser," I clarified, my voice echoing with absolute finality. "This is the end of the line, Brenda. You have made your choices, and now you are going to live with the devastating public consequences. You will never set foot in my home, my corporate offices, or my life again." The private elevator chimed softly. The heavy doors slid open, revealing David and another towering security guard. They stepped into the foyer, their expressions strictly professional, offering no room for negotiation. "Ma'am, it is time to leave," David stated firmly, gesturing toward the open elevator car. Brenda looked at the guards, then looked back at me, her eyes burning with pure hatred. She grabbed her expensive leather handbag from the sofa, threw it over her shoulder, and marched toward the exit. "You will regret this," she spat viciously. "When you fall, do not come crawling back to us." "Enjoy the eviction process," I replied simply. The elevator doors slid shut, sealing her away and leaving my penthouse in beautiful silence. I let out a long, shuddering breath, feeling the final heavy chains of my toxic childhood snap and fall away. I walked over to the expansive windows looking out over the sprawling city skyline, feeling a profound sense of closure. I was free. Then my personal smartphone buzzed sharply against the marble counter. I walked over and picked it up. The caller identification displayed Tiana's name. I hesitated briefly before pressing the green accept button and bringing the phone to my ear. "Hello," I answered cautiously. Nia, please help me." Tiana was sobbing hysterically, her voice barely recognizable through the frantic gasps. The background noise sounded like absolute chaos with things crashing and doors slamming. "He took everything. He took absolutely everything." "Tiana, calm down," I commanded sharply. "Who took everything?" "Bradley." My sister wailed, her cries echoing through the receiver. "I just went to the bank to check our joint accounts. He emptied my personal savings. He maxed out the new credit lines. He took the emergency cash. He packed his bags and fled the state. He is gone." I listened to the panicked breathing echoing through the phone speaker. The older sister instinct ingrained in me since childhood urged me to fix her mistakes. But that version of Nia no longer existed. I kept my voice flat, offering no emotional cushion. I told Tiana to meet me at a neutral coffee shop downtown in exactly 1 hour, warning her not to bring any lingering entitlement. I hung up before she could launch into another breakdown. I needed to look her in the eyes when I handed her a dose of reality. I grabbed my coat and told my driver to go. When I walked into the coffee shop, I spotted Tiana immediately. She sat at a corner table, and the sight of her was genuinely shocking. The arrogant golden child who had mocked my natural hair at her wedding was gone. Her designer clothes were rumpled and stained. Her expensive extensions were hastily tied back, and her face was puffy. She looked like a woman who had just survived a horrific hurricane. I pulled out the chair across from her and sat down without offering a greeting. Tiana looked up at me, her eyes bloodshot. She immediately launched into a rapid explanation of her morning. She had woken up to find Bradley's closet completely empty. Rushing to the bank, she discovered her new husband had systematically drained every single account attached to her name. He maxed out her credit cards and withdrew the funds Vernon had given them. He was a ghost, leaving her with a mountain of marital debt and a lease payment she could not afford. "You have to help me, Nia." Tiana pleaded, her hands trembling as she reached across the table to grab mine. I pulled my hands back, folding them in my lap. "I have $0 to my name. I cannot pay my rent next week. The landlord is threatening a notice because Bradley bounced the last check. You are a billionaire. You have a massive company. You can wire me the money. It would be pocket change for you. You want me to pay the rent for the luxury apartment you leased to impress a white con artist?" I asked, my tone dripping with calm disbelief. "The same man you actively plotted with to steal my tax digits and social security number a few days ago." Tiana flinched violently, shrinking back into her chair. Her eyes darted around the coffee shop, terrified someone might overhear us. "How did you know about that?" she whispered, cracking with shame. "I know everything, Tiana," I stated, leaning forward to ensure she felt the full weight of my gaze. "I know Bradley dropped his phone in my corporate lobby while being arrested for extortion. I know my security team saw your text messages. You were willing to commit federal identity theft against your own sister to secure a fraudulent mortgage and keep up your fake aesthetic. You were going to let me take the fall for your crimes." "I was desperate," Tiana cried out. "I knew Bradley was struggling with money. I saw the late notices hidden in his briefcase. I knew he was not old money, but Mom and Dad were so proud of him. I thought if we could just secure the new house, you would eventually bail us out. You always fix everything, Nia. You always step in and save the family. I thought you would pay off the loan once the dust settled." I stared at her, astounded by the depth of her delusion. She had fully internalized the toxic dynamic our parents created. She honestly believed my sole purpose was to act as an endless ATM for her disastrous life choices. She thought she could steal my identity, commit a felony, and I would absorb the damage because I was the reliable scapegoat. The audacity was breathtaking. "I am not your savior, Tiana," I said, my voice echoing with finality. "I am not the family cleanup crew anymore. You chose to marry a fraud because you valued proximity to whiteness over genuine character." You chose to stand by while Mom and Dad kicked me out of your wedding. You chose to plot against my livelihood. You made those choices, and now you are going to sit in the center of the wreckage you created. Tiana began to sob, ugly tears spilling down her cheeks. So what am I supposed to do? I am going to be homeless. I have not worked in 2 years because Bradley told me I would be a traditional housewife. You cannot just leave me to starve. You own a venture capital firm. Just hire me. Give me an executive position. I can do public relations for your brand. You owe me that much as my sister. I opened my sleek leather briefcase and pulled out a single crisp sheet of paper. I placed it onto the wooden table and slid it across the surface until it rested in front of her. Tiana sniffled, wiping her eyes as she looked down at the document. It was not a blank check or a lucrative executive contract. It was a standard entry-level job application for a minimum wage receptionist role at one of the subsidiary call centers owned by Vanguard Holdings. Tiana stared at the bold letters, her expression morphing from desperate hope to profound outrage. A receptionist, she spat, regaining a flash of her former arrogance. You want me to answer phones for minimum wage? I am a college graduate. I cannot work a peasant job like this. It is humiliating. You are Tiana Wilson, and you are currently broke, nearly homeless, and out of options. I corrected her, tapping a fingernail against the application form. I do not do handouts, I do not reward entitlement, and I certainly do not hire liabilities for my executive teams. This is the only lifeline you are getting from me. You start right at the bottom, or you get absolutely nothing. Tiana stared at the single sheet of paper as if it were coated in highly toxic poison. Her face flushed a deep, blotchy red, completely clashing with her rumpled designer blouse. She snatched the application off the table and crumpled it into a tight, aggressive ball, hurling it directly at my chest. Are you completely insane? Tiana shrieked, no longer caring who in the quiet coffee shop was watching us. I have a master's degree in public relations. I am the wife of a Caldwell, even if he is currently dealing with a minor financial misunderstanding. I will not sit behind a cheap plastic desk and answer phones for people who make less in a single year than I used to spend on handbags. This is a deliberate, malicious insult. It is reality, I replied, my voice steady and completely unbothered by her explosive tantrum. Your expensive education was fully funded by the massive credit card debt you and Mom illegally racked up in my name. Your husband is a fugitive who wiped out your entire savings. You have zero leverage, Tiana. She slammed her hands flat on the table, violently knocking over her iced latte. The brown liquid spilled across the wood, dripping onto her expensive shoes. You are just trying to humiliate me because Mom and Dad always loved me more. You want me to be a struggling peasant, so you can finally feel superior to the golden child. I looked at her, realizing with absolute certainty that the pampered, deeply entitled core of her personality would never change. She would rather face impending homelessness than accept an honest day of hard work. I stood up, buttoned my tailored coat, and left a crisp $20 bill on the wet table to cover her spilled drink. Good luck with the landlord, Tiana, I said softly. I walked out of the cafe, leaving her screaming my name, completely severing the sisterly bond that had only ever existed to drag me down. The cold, crisp air outside felt incredibly refreshing. I stepped into the back of my waiting black SUV and instructed my driver to head straight to the Vanguard Holdings corporate tower. I had zero time to dwell on a sister who actively refused to save herself. Instead, I redirected every single ounce of my focus into my rapidly expanding empire. Over the next 3 weeks, my days were entirely consumed by high-stakes negotiations, relentless financial audits, and international video calls spanning 5 different time zones. I was actively finalizing the acquisition of a massive tech logistics firm based in London. The deal was worth a staggering $45 million, and it required my absolute undivided attention. I sat at the head of my expansive glass boardroom table, flanked by my top executives dismantling weak counteroffers and securing favorable terms that would officially solidify my firm as a global powerhouse. When the final digital signatures were executed and the massive wire transfers cleared, my team popped vintage champagne. I stood looking out over the sparkling Atlanta skyline, feeling a profound, overwhelming sense of triumph that had absolutely nothing to do with seeking my father and his outdated approval. I had built a table where I was universally respected. Meanwhile, the regular updates I received from my legal team painted a starkly contrasting picture of the suburban fortress I had left behind. Marcus, my lead corporate attorney, informed me that Vernon and Brenda were living in a state of aggressive, profound denial. They had completely ignored the court-approved eviction notice. Instead of packing their belongings or seeking affordable housing, they were actively maintaining their elaborate country club charade. Brenda was still attending her weekly bridge club meetings, desperately spinning a frantic web of lies about taking a long European vacation, while their home underwent a surprise luxury renovation. Vernon had apparently attempted to secure a fraudulent business loan using a fake employment history, a move that was instantly flagged and decisively denied by the major banks. They honestly believed I would blink first. They thought I would cave under the imaginary pressure of family loyalty and miraculously tear up the eviction notice at the 11th hour to save their reputation. They were betting their entire future on a weak, compliant version of me that I had buried the exact night they kicked me out of that wedding. The relentless countdown continued without mercy. Day 25 came and went without a single cardboard box being packed on their end. Day 28 brought a frantic, unhinged voicemail from Aunt Denise aggressively accusing me of destroying the ancestral legacy and demanding I immediately transfer ownership of the property back to Vernon. I promptly forwarded her phone number to my legal team with strict instructions to issue a severe legal warning for extreme harassment. I was absolutely impenetrable. I spent the evening of day 29 treating my core corporate team to an exclusive 5-course dinner at a private rooftop restaurant, celebrating our international merger. My phone remained blissfully silent. I did not lose a single second of sleep, wondering where my parents would go. Then the sun rose on the 30th day. The absolute uncompromising legal deadline had officially arrived. I stood in my penthouse kitchen brewing a fresh cup of dark roast coffee as the early morning light filtered through the expansive custom-built glass windows. My secure phone buzzed sharply against the cold marble countertop. It was a direct scheduled call from David, my head of security, who had been coordinating directly with the local sheriff and the civil division. I picked up the device and pressed it to my ear, listening closely to the crisp, highly professional update. The heavy transport trucks were already pulling into the upscale neighborhood. The local authorities were actively walking up the sweeping oak-lined driveway. Vernon and Brenda were trapped inside, completely surrounded by the devastating, undeniable reality of their own malicious actions. The clock had run out. The heavy rhythmic pounding on the custom mahogany front door shattered the quiet Thursday morning. Vernon, wearing his monogrammed silk robe, stomped down the sweeping staircase, loudly complaining about unannounced deliveries. Brenda followed closely behind, clutching her coffee mug and tightening her expensive cashmere wrap. Vernon yanked the door open, a condescending remark already formed on his lips. He froze. 2 uniformed deputies from the county sheriff's department stood on the pristine brick porch. Behind them, a large idling moving truck was parked directly across the perfectly manicured driveway. The lead deputy stepped forward, his expression completely devoid of sympathy. He handed Vernon a thick stack of court-stamped documents. He announced that the final 30-day grace period for the eviction had officially expired at midnight. They were executing a lawful writ of possession on behalf of Vanguard Holdings. Vernon's face flushed a deep, dangerous red. He crumpled the papers in his fist, screaming that there had to be a colossal mistake. He aggressively pointed his finger at the deputies, threatening to call the chief of police, a man he constantly bragged about playing golf with at the country club. The deputy did not flinch. He calmly placed a hand on his utility belt and informed Vernon that the police chief had no jurisdiction over a finalized civil court order. He gave my parents exactly 15 minutes to gather their essential medications, identification documents, and immediate personal clothing before the physical removal of the property would commence. Brenda dropped her coffee mug. It shattered against the foyer tiles, splashing dark liquid across the imported rugs. She stumbled backward, gasping for air, as the devastating reality finally pierced through her thick, stubborn layer of absolute delusion. They had not packed a single cardboard box. For an entire month, they had arrogantly lived in my house, firmly believing that my legal warnings were just an elaborate emotional bluff. They honestly thought the daughter they had treated like a disposable peasant for 3 decades would magically capitulate to the sacred pressures of family loyalty at the 11th hour. They were entirely wrong. The deputies stepped inside, formally securing the perimeter of the residence. A crew of 6 burly mandated movers wearing heavy work boots marched straight into the pristine foyer. They began systematically lifting the heavy, expensive furniture that Brenda had spent years accumulating to project her fake high society image. The massive custom dining table, the exact same table where they had proudly sat with Bradley and a corporate lawyer to extort me, was dismantled in mere seconds. Brenda ran frantically between the movers, shrieking and waving her arms, desperately trying to block them from touching her expensive crystal vases. A deputy warned her that further interference meant immediate arrest. Brenda fell silent, her entire body shaking with sheer, unadulterated terror. The grand, humiliating spectacle inevitably spilled out onto the front lawn. The movers began depositing my parents' luxurious belongings directly onto the damp morning grass and the concrete curb. Piles of designer clothing, velvet armchairs, and expensive home theater equipment were stacked haphazardly next to the neighborhood trash cans. The commotion caught the attention of the suburban community. Front doors began to open up and down the wealthy cul-de-sac. These were the exact same neighbors Brenda had relentlessly terrorized for years. She had constantly bragged to them about Tiana's elite white husband and her fabricated generational wealth. Mrs. Higgins, the neighborhood association president, whom Brenda routinely mocked for driving a modest sedan, stepped out onto her driveway. She stood there in her slippers, slowly sipping her morning tea, watching the complete dismantling of Brenda's fraudulent empire with absolute unconcealed fascination. Other neighbors gathered on their porches, whispering to each other and pointing directly at the massive pile of seized furniture. They eagerly pulled out their smartphones, shamelessly recording the dramatic, unprecedented downfall of the neighborhood bullies. Brenda tried to hide her face behind her hands, completely mortified. She was stripped of her title, her home, and her fake prestige instantly. Vernon tried to maintain some semblance of his crushed dignity by aggressively yelling at a mover who was carrying his expensive wooden cigar humidor. The deputy immediately stepped between them, loudly ordering Vernon to step back onto the public sidewalk. Vernon, the man who had always demanded absolute respect and submission from everyone around him, was reduced to a powerless, sweating spectator standing on the edge of the street. As the movers carried out the final pieces of bedroom furniture, a sleek, polished black luxury sedan slowly turned onto the quiet suburban street. The vehicle glided smoothly down the cul-de-sac, slowing down as it approached the chaotic scene unfolding on the curb. Vernon looked up, his eyes widening in pure, unadulterated horror. It was Reverend Miller, the highly respected senior pastor of the most prominent elite megachurch in the city. For the past 3 weeks, Vernon had been strategically sitting in the pastor's private office, crying fake tears and playing the ultimate victim. Vernon had aggressively campaigned to turn the entire congregation against me. He had spun a malicious, highly fabricated narrative, claiming that I was a greedy, demon-possessed child who was using my sudden corporate wealth to steal my elderly parents' hard-earned retirement funds. He had begged the church leadership to intervene and pray for my wicked soul. The pastor's car came to a complete stop, directly in front of the massive pile of evicted furniture. Reverend Miller slowly rolled down his tinted passenger window. He stared at the uniformed sheriff's deputies, the heavily armed security, and the undeniable glaring reality of Vernon's profound financial ruin. The pastor looked directly at Vernon, taking in the wrinkled silk robe, the frantic sweating, and the humiliating reality of a legal forced eviction. In that single devastating moment, the elaborate web of pious lies Vernon had actively spun at the church completely disintegrated. Reverend Miller shook his head slowly, his expression shifting from pastoral concern to profound, absolute disgust. The last remaining shred of their social standing evaporated in seconds. Exactly 3 weeks after the sheriff cleared out the sprawling suburban estate, My secure corporate line buzzed with an urgent incoming call from Marcus. I stood by the panoramic windows of my executive suite, watching traffic crawl along the busy Atlanta highways. I pressed the flashing green button on my console, instructing my lead attorney to speak. Marcus did not waste a single second with pleasantries. He immediately announced that federal marshals had successfully apprehended Bradley in a cheap neon-lit casino resort down in Miami, Florida. My legal team had relentlessly pursued the criminal complaints for the attempted identity theft wire fraud and the unpaid $38,000 invoice from the Magnolia Estate. We had handed the authorities a completely airtight, meticulously documented portfolio of his felonies. Bradley had apparently been sitting at a high-stakes blackjack table, wearing another wrinkled fake designer suit, attempting to charm a wealthy older woman when the federal agents firmly placed him in heavy steel handcuffs. I smiled, taking a slow, deeply satisfying sip of my sparkling water. The wheels of absolute, uncompromising justice were finally crushing the man who had arrogantly thought he could destroy my livelihood without facing severe consequences. Marcus continued reading from the extensive preliminary report provided by the district attorney. The details emerging from the federal investigation were genuinely staggering. Bradley was not just a desperate, heavily indebted man who had made a few terrible financial decisions. He was a highly calculated professional serial romance scammer. The authorities had quickly uncovered a vast hidden network of fake identities, forged banking documents, and offshore shell accounts. Tiana was not his first victim, and my parents were certainly not his first gullible targets. Bradley had a very specific predatory modus operandi. He intentionally targeted upwardly mobile, deeply insecure Black families who were desperate for societal validation. He recognized their profound desire for proximity to whiteness and perceived generational wealth. He would swoop into their lives, weaponizing his skin color and leased luxury vehicles to project an illusion of old money prestige. He let these insecure families aggressively fund his lavish lifestyle, draining their retirement accounts and maxing out their credit lines, all while letting them proudly parade him around their elite country clubs as the ultimate status symbol. The psychological manipulation was incredibly precise and entirely malicious. Bradley knew parents like mine would rather go bankrupt than admit to their judgmental church congregation that their prized white son-in-law was a fraudulent con artist. They eagerly handed him their entire life savings because he provided the specific aesthetic they craved. Vernon and Brenda had gleefully sacrificed their successful, independent Black daughter to maintain the hollow approval of a man who viewed them as an easy paycheck. I listened to Marcus detail the sheer volume of Bradley's previous victims, feeling a sharp, cold wave of absolute disgust. He had left a trail of devastated, financially ruined women across 4 different states. He had always managed to slip away right before the massive debts exploded, leaving the disgraced families to quietly absorb the catastrophic losses due to their own overwhelming public shame. But Bradley had made a fatal, irreversible miscalculation when he decided to target Tiana. He had arrogantly assumed the estranged older sister was just another submissive family member who could be bullied into paying his mounting debts. He had absolutely no idea. He was attempting to extort a ruthless corporate titan who possessed the infinite resources required to hunt him down and lock him away for decades. I instructed Marcus to coordinate with the federal prosecutors. I wanted my corporate legal team to provide any necessary resources to ensure Bradley faced the absolute maximum sentence possible under the law. There would be zero leniency, no plea deals, and absolutely no quiet settlements. I wanted his mugshot plastered across every single local news station in Atlanta. I wanted Vernon and Brenda to turn on their television in whatever cramped, rundown apartment they had fled to and watch the man they had chosen over me being frog-marched into a federal penitentiary. I ended the call with Marcus feeling a profound, undeniable sense of vindication. The toxic, suffocating illusion of the Caldwell family prestige had been thoroughly dismantled and burned to the ground. Meanwhile, the harsh, unforgiving reality of the situation had finally caught up with the former golden child. Tiana was no longer parading around exclusive bridal boutiques or sipping expensive champagne in VIP lounges. The devastating financial ruin Bradley had inflicted upon her was absolute and complete. My private investigator provided a routine update on my younger sister's current living situation. Tiana was residing in a cheap, dimly lit motel on the absolute outskirts of the city. She had pawned the last of her designer handbags just to cover the weekly room rate. The glamorous high society life she had boasted about had completely evaporated, leaving her isolated in a cramped, musty room with peeling wallpaper and a constantly flickering overhead light. That afternoon, a courier officially served Tiana with a thick stack of legal documents. They were not divorce papers. They were formal annulment papers, drafted by a court-appointed attorney, citing severe premeditated fraud as the primary cause for the dissolution of the marriage. Her fairy tale wedding, the exact same event I had been viciously banned from attending, was being legally erased from existence as if it had never happened. Tiana sat on the edge of a sagging motel mattress, staring at the bold legal print. Desperation finally eclipsed her stubborn, deeply ingrained pride. She picked up her cracked smartphone, hands trembling violently, and dialed my personal phone number. She desperately needed me to quickly swoop in, pay her exorbitant mounting bills, and magically rescue her from the devastating, irreversible consequences of her own terrible choices. She listened to the line ring once, expecting me to answer. Instead, she heard the cold, automated voice of the cellular provider informing her that the number was permanently disconnected. While Tiana sat trembling in her cheap motel room, grasping the full, devastating reality of her absolute isolation. Vernon and Brenda were experiencing their own customized version of absolute hell. My former parents had officially exhausted every single one of their social connections. The wealthy country club friends they had relentlessly bragged to immediately blocked their phone numbers. The prestigious church congregation that Vernon had tried to manipulate completely turned their backs the exact moment the scandalous eviction became public knowledge. With zero credit, zero savings, and zero leverage, they were forced to sign a lease on a tiny, dilapidated apartment on the very far industrial outskirts of the city. The stark contrast between their former sprawling mansion and this new cramped reality was jarring. There were no sweeping oak-lined driveways or crystal chandeliers here. Instead, their new existence consisted of peeling linoleum floors, constantly leaking faucets, and the relentless, deafening roar of commercial freight trucks passing by their single unwashed window at all hours of the night. The tiny kitchen lacked proper ventilation, causing the persistent smell of fried food and stale cigarette smoke from neighboring units to seep through the thin drywall. Vernon, who previously scoffed at anything less than five-star dining, was now forced to eat cheap canned soup on a folding card table. The overwhelming, suffocating stress of severe poverty instantly shattered their carefully constructed marital facade. Without my steady, silent financial subsidies, masking their profound incompetence, Vernon and Brenda quickly turned on each other with absolute vicious cruelty. Marcus, my corporate attorney, received reports of their frequent explosive arguments through the aggressive noise complaints filed by their new disgruntled neighbors. Brenda constantly shrieked at Vernon, viciously mocking his failed business ventures and aggressively blaming him for handing over their entire life savings to a white con artist just to secure a fake social aesthetic. She screamed that a real man would have thoroughly investigated Bradley's financial background before offering him the family vault. Vernon aggressively fired back, his voice echoing through the thin apartment walls, blaming Brenda for her toxic, unrelenting vanity. He yelled that her desperate need to pamper Tiana and her malicious public bullying of their eldest daughter was the sole reason they were now rotting in a tiny roach-infested box. They were two deeply bitter, aging narcissists trapped in a claustrophobic cage of their own making, slowly tearing each other apart because the reliable scapegoat they usually attacked was permanently out of reach. As the shocking news of Bradley's federal arrest and my parents' humiliating eviction rapidly circulated through the local community, a highly predictable, incredibly pathetic shift occurred within our extended family. The very same aunts, uncles, and cousins who had flooded my phone with toxic, berating messages just weeks prior suddenly experienced a miraculous change of heart. Aunt Denise, the woman who had aggressively left me a furious voicemail, demanding I bow down to Tiana's success in the name of Black family unity, was the first to completely reverse her stance. Now that the undeniable reality of my massive corporate wealth was public knowledge and the fraudulent nature of Tiana's marriage was fully exposed, the extended family recognized exactly who held the ultimate power. They frantically attempted to re-establish contact, completely ignoring the vicious disrespect they had previously hurled my way. My executive reception desk at Vanguard Holdings suddenly became a highly active dumping ground for their desperate, transparent apologies. Every single morning, my head of security, David, would intercept massive, extravagant floral arrangements, premium chocolate assortments, and expensive hand-woven gift baskets sent by various relatives. Aunt Denise sent a massive bouquet of imported white lilies, accompanied by a lengthy tear-stained letter. In her desperate note, she aggressively attempted to rewrite history. She claimed that she had always secretly known Bradley was a manipulative fraud and insisted that she had only yelled at me because she was trying to protect me from the ensuing family drama. Other relatives sent similarly pathetic, groveling emails praising my fierce independence and begging for the opportunity to take me out to a lavish dinner so we could properly reconnect as a strong, united family. They honestly believed that a few expensive gift baskets and some hollow fabricated compliments would instantly erase decades of systematic exclusion and malicious mockery. They assumed that my newly acquired billionaire status meant I would naturally want to step up and fund their lifestyles, acting as the wealthy, forgiving matriarch of a family that had actively despised my very existence when I was struggling in a damp basement. I did not entertain a single one of their desperate transactional peace offerings. I refused to let my hard-earned corporate empire become a comfortable safety net for people who only respected my bank account. I instructed my executive staff to gather every single floral arrangement, every gourmet gift basket, and every groveling handwritten letter. I hired a private dedicated courier service to pack everything securely into a large delivery van. I did not keep a single item. I sent the entire massive, expensive collection directly back to Aunt Denise's suburban home, knowing she was currently acting as the central gossip hub for the rest of the panicked, scrambling relatives. I instructed the courier to require a direct physical signature upon delivery, ensuring they could not simply deny receiving the potent, unambiguous rejection. The courier recorded the entire interaction on a specialized body camera, capturing the exact, devastating moment. Aunt Denise opened her front door. She initially smiled eagerly, assuming the massive delivery van meant she had successfully manipulated her way into my good graces, before her face crumbled into profound, bitter humiliation. Attached to the very top of the largest, most expensive gift basket was a single crisp piece of heavy corporate cardstock containing my final permanent response to their sudden convenient loyalty and their pathetic, transparent attempts at groveling reconciliation. The heavy note simply read, "The bank is now permanently closed. Enjoy your family unity." That single piece of heavy corporate cardstock severed the final invisible chain that had kept me bound to their toxic dysfunction. The profound silence that followed was not empty. It was the beautiful, expansive space I needed to finally build my own table. Exactly 2 weeks after that delivery van pulled away from the dark driveway, my penthouse was filled with the rich, vibrant sounds of genuine laughter and classic soul music. I was hosting a massive, luxurious dinner party. But unlike the suffocating, performative Sunday dinners of my childhood, there was not a single drop of shared blood in the room. This gathering was exclusively for my chosen family. I walked through the sprawling living area, taking in the beautiful sight of 24 incredible individuals who had actively supported my journey. My private chef had prepared a spectacular feast that honored our culture without any of the bitter resentment that usually seasoned my mother's cooking. There were perfectly braised short ribs, truffle macaroni and cheese, and blackened collard greens resting on elegant silver warming trays. The atmosphere was completely devoid of judgment, arrogant posturing, or aggressive social climbing. No one here had to pretend to be someone they were not. We were simply celebrating Black excellence, mutual respect, and undeniable success. I made my way over to the Marble Kitchen Island, where my fiercely loyal best friend and chief operating officer, Sienna, was pouring out generous glasses of expensive vintage champagne. When I was 22 years old, sleeping on a deflating air mattress in a damp, unfinished basement, Sienna was the only person who recognized my severe depression. While Vernon and Brenda were actively parading Tiana around exclusive country clubs and demanding I pay them $800 a month just to sleep near their furnace, Sienna was showing up at my tiny basement window. She would pass me warm, foil-wrapped containers of spicy jambalaya and aggressively demand that I step away from my glowing laptop screen. She never once called me a failure or a dropout. She constantly reminded me that my entrepreneurial vision was brilliant and entirely valid. She invested her own meager waitress tips into my very first server hosting fees. Now she was wearing a stunning designer gown, managing a global logistics division, and laughing freely in a penthouse that we had effectively earned together through sheer unadulterated grit and unwavering loyalty. Standing by the expansive floor-to-ceiling windows was Elijah, the brilliant, sharp-minded venture capitalist who had handed me my very first round of seed funding. I walked over and handed him a crystal flute of champagne. We clinked our glasses together silently, acknowledging the massive international acquisition deal we had closed just days prior. When I first approached Elijah over a decade ago, I was wearing a cheap, poorly fitted thrift store suit and clutching a battered presentation folder. My father had explicitly told me that morning that no respectable investor would ever hand a single dollar to a stubborn, unpolished girl who refused to finish a standard business degree. Vernon had aggressively insisted that my only path to value was marrying a wealthy man who could tolerate my loud personality. Elijah had taken one look at my complex financial algorithms, completely ignored my lack of formal credentials, and immediately recognized a highly profitable corporate disruptor. He had mentored me aggressively, protected my equity during hostile negotiations, and actively shielded me from predatory lenders. He had provided the firm fatherly business guidance that my own biological father had maliciously withheld out of pure, deeply rooted jealousy. As I moved through the room, my secure corporate smartphone buzzed gently inside my tailored blazer pocket. I pulled it out and glanced at the bright screen. It was a blocked notification alert showing that Brenda had attempted to leave yet another frantic, weeping voicemail from an unrecognizable prepaid burner phone. She was likely calling from the cramped, roach-infested apartment she now shared with a bitter, defeated husband. A few months ago, the mere sight of her blocked number would have triggered a massive, suffocating wave of intense anxiety and deeply rooted childhood guilt. Now I felt absolutely nothing. I did not feel an ounce of pity, anger, or sadness. I simply swiped my thumb across the smooth glass screen, permanently deleting the notification without a second thought. The profound apathy was the greatest, most absolute victory of my entire life. I slid the phone back into my pocket, completely severing my attention from the miserable, self-inflicted ruins of their shattered suburban facade. I tapped a silver spoon against the delicate rim of my crystal champagne flute. A crisp, clear ringing sound instantly cut through the lively music and the warm, overlapping conversations. The entire room immediately fell into a respectful, attentive silence. 24 faces turned toward me, their expressions radiating genuine love, deep admiration, and absolute unwavering support. I looked around at my powerful, beautiful chosen family, feeling a massive surge of overwhelming gratitude. I slowly raised my glass high into the air. I want to make a toast tonight. I began, my voice echoing with pure, undeniable authority. For over 3 decades, I was aggressively taught that loyalty required absolute submission. I was told that setting firm boundaries was a vicious act of betrayal and that protecting my own peace was entirely selfish. I was conditioned to believe that blood automatically entitled people to endlessly consume my resources, my energy, and my self-respect. I paused, taking a slow, deliberate breath as I looked directly at Sienna and Elijah. But every single person standing in this room actively proved that narrative wrong. You taught me that true loyalty is fiercely protective, not maliciously parasitic. You taught me that genuine respect must always be mutually earned, never forcefully demanded. I turned my gaze toward the breathtaking, glittering Atlanta city skyline, stretching out endlessly beyond the towering glass windows, to absolute, uncompromising boundaries and beautiful new beginnings. I smiled. 6 months have passed since that disastrous wedding day. I am standing on the expansive terrace of my Atlanta penthouse, wrapping a thick silk shawl around my shoulders as the crisp autumn breeze rolls in. The city skyline glitters endlessly before me, a sea of bright lights that mirrors the boundless potential of my own life. It is incredibly quiet up here. There are no frantic phone calls demanding emergency funds, no passive-aggressive remarks about my natural hair, and absolutely no expectations to shrink myself into a convenient submissive scapegoat. I take a slow, deep breath, tasting the absolute purity of my hard-won freedom. The silence in my life is not an absence of family. It is the presence of profound, unshakable peace. The fallout from my biological family's self-inflicted destruction is entirely permanent. Vernon and Brenda are still trapped in that cramped, noisy apartment on the industrial outskirts of the city. The exclusive country club memberships have long been revoked. Reverend Miller and the prestigious church congregation completely excommunicated them, recognizing that their pious facade masked a malicious, greedy core. My former parents now spend their days working minimum-wage retail jobs just to afford basic groceries, constantly turning their bitter resentment toward each other. Without my silent financial subsidies to prop up their illusions, they are forced to confront the harsh reality of their own monumental incompetence. They eagerly traded a fiercely loyal, successful black daughter for the cheap, fraudulent aesthetic of a white con artist. Now, they have absolutely nothing to show for it, except a massive mountain of unpayable debt and a severely tarnished legacy. They try to call from blocked numbers every few weeks, desperately leaving voicemails filled with fake apologies and subtle demands for financial rescue. I delete every single message without listening. The bank remains permanently closed. Tiana's reality is equally devastating. After receiving her annulment papers in that cheap, roach-infested motel, she finally realized that her golden child status held absolutely zero currency in the real world. I kept my promise and completely refused to hire her for any executive position at Vanguard Holdings. Forced by the immediate threat of imminent starvation, Tiana eventually swallowed her massive pride and accepted a grueling, low-paying job answering phones at a local dental clinic. She has to wear cheap synthetic uniforms instead of custom lace gowns. She commutes on public transportation every single morning because Bradley stole her leased luxury vehicle before his federal arrest. The brilliant high society future my parents confidently promised her completely evaporated, leaving her to navigate the exact same harsh, unforgiving world they always expected me to fail in. I heard through the industry grapevine that she constantly complains to her new coworkers about her cruel billionaire older sister who maliciously refuses to share the wealth. She still lacks any genuine self-awareness, firmly believing she is the ultimate victim of a terrible misunderstanding. I simply smile when I hear these updates. Her deep bitterness is no longer my heavy burden to carry. Aunt Denise and the rest of the extended relatives who previously bombarded my phone with toxic, berating messages have also been completely cut off. Their desperate, groveling attempts to send apology gifts and floral arrangements ended the exact day I sent that massive delivery van back to their suburban driveways. They finally understood that my boundaries are constructed from solid steel. Looking back at the absolute wreckage of their lives, I realized the sheer magnitude of the generational curse I finally managed to break. In our community, we are constantly bombarded with toxic narratives demanding unconditional loyalty to abusive relatives. We are repeatedly told to respect our elders, even when those same elders maliciously destroy our mental health. We are conditioned to believe that setting firm protective boundaries is a deep, unforgivable betrayal of our culture and our shared bloodline. For 34 years, I desperately sought validation from people who were fundamentally committed to misunderstanding me. I exhausted myself trying to prove my worth to parents who actively preferred a comfortable, fabricated lie over my brilliant, unapologetic truth. They eagerly weaponized my financial success when it benefited their social standing, but viciously attacked my cultural identity the moment I refused to comply with their outdated restrictive molds. Breaking that vicious cycle required me to deeply grieve the loving family I deserved, but never actually had. It required me to step out of the dark, damp basement of their crushing expectations and meticulously build my own towering corporate empire from scratch. I had to learn the difficult lesson that true love is never purely transactional, and genuine respect does not require you to constantly beg for a seat at the dining table. I built my own magnificent table. I filled it with brilliant mentors, fiercely loyal colleagues, and fiercely protective friends who actively celebrate my intelligence instead of constantly trying to tear it down. I am no longer the disposable, forgotten scapegoat hiding in the shadows of an ungrateful household. I am the sole architect of my own extraordinary destiny, firmly rooted in my personal power and constantly surrounded by individuals who truly uplift my resilient spirit. The journey to get here was paved with incredible hardship, profound betrayal, and moments where I genuinely doubted my own sanity. But emerging on the other side as an unmovable, highly respected titan in the corporate world made every single tear entirely worth it. Their brutal rejection at that wedding venue was not a tragic ending. It was the brilliant necessary catalyst that permanently launched me into my absolute unapologetic greatness. I reclaimed my narrative, seized control of my immense financial resources, and ruthlessly ejected every single parasite from my orbit. Today I stand victorious, unbroken, and unapologetically free. Blood makes you related, but respect and loyalty make you family. Have you ever had to walk away from toxic relatives to protect your peace? Tell me your story in the comments. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more stories about taking back your power.